Congratulations.
So too.
I'm going to call the regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order for Tuesday, March 12th. I want to welcome everybody who's in attendance. I'm going to first take the minutes, approve the minutes, and then I'm going to ask for an amendment of the agenda to take up items 3 and 4 first, so then we can devote the rest of the evening to the Board of Education and their presentation. So first item is approval of the minutes.
Second.
Okay, changes, corrections, additions, deletions?
None, they were excellent.
No, there's the motion under item number 3 there can't be Mr. North making the motion and also seconding it. It was Mr. Blumenthal.
Good catch.
Good catch.
Leslie already knows that.
All right, okay. Any other changes? All those in favor say aye.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay, well, sorry, okay, speak up.
Kevin thinks he's all powerful, so I mean.
I don't understand the numbering convention.
Because it was taken out
all
of
moved
sequence
around.
from the
We did it
agenda.
out of
We
sequence.
moved the agenda around.
Oh, so these numbers refer to the original place on the
Yeah,
agenda?
they're true to the agenda, but.
Got it, okay, thanks. That's fine.
Peter? No? Okay, any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Okay, I'll take a
Motion
motion.
to amend the agenda.
All right.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Item 3 is CNR. I had that put on the agenda so that we were clear with respect to CNR and the direction we were providing the two boards, that we were going to provide them with additional funding in the amount, I believe, was $100,000 for CNR. And I just wanted that was verified by the board. I don't think we took a motion on it, but just sort of that it was an understanding that we were going to be able to do that. Mary Ann, is that your understanding from
That
the
was
Board
my
of Selectmen?
understanding.
Okay. Burke, is that your understanding from the
And it
Board
was
of
split between-
Education?
Would you do, split it 50/50?
Split it 50.
You going to split it 50/50? Okay.
That's what's in here.
Okay, great. Any other further comments on that? Okay. All right, next item on the agenda would be item 4, request to establish a special revenue fund to track appropriations previously approved for town and school safety measures. Last meeting, we approved 2 items. One was for up to $177,000 for the Board of Education, along with up to $77,000 for the Board of Selectmen to make some adjustments as requested by the Director of Public Works. Now, as I understand it from talking with Mary Ann and with Debbie, a special revenue fund is required in order to appropriately track that amount, and it could be one special revenue fund for both. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I'll move
What
it.
is that?
Well, go ahead. Would you explain?
Yeah. Because we don't feel the project's going to be complete before June 30th. We don't, and we're putting out bids because we have to bid this out. And we want to be able to show this separately so we know that this appropriation occurred. And then we'll transfer the funds to that account. And then when it's finished, we'll close it out. That's the only reason we set it up as a special fund.
Otherwise, it goes
Could be
into the
15,
budget and then it gets closed out, I think.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
it
closed out.
gets closed out.
Or it can accidentally get transferred to and fro, which with your not to exceed, we really want to be able to track that.
Okay. All right. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I move to create a special revenue fund
Second.
for the
Oh, sorry.
purpose of
We're hurried
tracking
tonight.
appropriations up to $177,000 for the Board of Education, up to $77,000 for the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of the safety measures approved at our board.
Just say our prior meeting.
I think the number is 776. you want to say.
Yeah, it was 77.6, sorry.
Up to $77,600.
Okay.
Second now.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, now we're going to go back to the regular numbering on the agenda, and that is to have a presentation by the Board of Education regarding their budget presentation. Bye, Mary Ann, thank you. Good luck with the Board of Selectmen budget. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Curtis, who's the superintendent of the schools, for a presentation regarding the budgets. And I do appreciate, by the way, the fact that we had these budget books on Friday, so we had the weekend to go through them in detail and not be rushed on them. So thank you for that, Matt. Okay, the floor is yours.
All right, great. And it's great seeing everybody, and I'm looking forward to moving through this PowerPoint. I had sent I think the original PowerPoint forward to you that we presented to the board. This is scaled back just a few slides, but the general content of it is the same. So I'll work my way through the presentation, and certainly can answer any questions that you have. So really, we've divided the presentation into three key areas to work through this evening. One is the overall contextual factors that we're faced with as we do the budget planning process. The second is to really bring to light some conversation on return on investment, where we spend our dollars, how we allocate them, and what is our return in terms of student achievement and student performance. And then the key piece are what are the new drivers for the superintendent's budget as we move forward in the planning process. So the overall numbers in the budget, new requested amount is $64,918,869, a $1.2 million increase. And we presented the, based on prior conversations, the percentage in two ways. One includes the additional pension contribution recommended by the three boards as we work through the process, which brings the budget increase to 1.89. The second figure is in comparison to the 1.5 guideline that we were provided by the Board of Finance last time we were together, which was kind of held harmless for the planning process on that pension contribution and try to get to the 1.5, and we're at this point 1.59. So when we think about the context and really frame a problem of practice for us to work through, it's really how do we continue to improve the quality of our school system, what we recognize is still a very challenging economic climate. The second piece, and I'll talk more about it as we speak to some of the new requests we have and what we're faced with, how do we respond to some of this, what is really sweeping educational reform on both the curriculum side and the teacher and administrative evaluation side of the magnitude that we haven't seen ever really in education, how we're going to respond to that and move forward. Just the contextual factors of moving back to 05-06 to see where the budget increases were, and then obviously what happened when we had the fiscal crisis over the course of the last several years, where the budget increases have been. For our planning purposes, when we presented early on to the board and tried to align our kind of continuous improvement plan and what we were talking about, we try to respond thoughtfully to the question of your enrollment is declining. Why is your budget? Why doesn't it stay flat, or why doesn't it go down as the enrollment continues to go down? So we kind of framed it as we have downward pressures and then upward pressures that we need to respond to try to mitigate that increase and come in as responsibly as we can. So certainly the decline in enrollment, as we'll talk about later on, definitely allows us to make what we're calling some responsible reductions to certified and non-certified staff without having a negative impact on program. That's absolutely the truth. Being cognizant of the economic climate, and we put the guideline of the Board of Finance for the sake of the conversation in there as a planning factor in cost containment. The other side, the upward arrow, are some of the things we're working to respond to. Educational reform, additional mandates that we're faced with. Special education continues to be complex, and we need to be innovative in how we meet the needs of those students. Technology on the horizon, the consistent changes we see from technology and how we're going to incorporate that in both teaching and learning. School security, quite honestly, wasn't at the forefront of all our minds as much as it certainly is now with the Newtown tragedy and costs that will be associated with that in the future, and certainly have been already that we've addressed. And you know, an example of a mandate to bring to light is the magnet school preschool tuition. There was legislation passed a year ago that took local LEAs off the hook for magnet school tuition for preschool students, meaning that if a Simsbury resident wanted to send their child to preschool in Avon or Bloomfield at one of the full-day magnet programs, we pick up the tuition costs for that, even though preschool is not a mandated program. That went away. We felt that was appropriate to go away. That is now back. So that's back to the tune of $83,000 that we'll be responsible for. So when you talk about mitigating circumstances, that's the value of a teaching position that we're, faced with in a mandate that we don't necessarily have control of. So those are some of the challenges that we try to thoughtfully plan through as we put the budget presentation together. Enrollment is certainly something we've spent quite a bit talking about this year with our facilities and enrollment task force study, but this is a snapshot of enrollment over the past 5 years. You can see the 5-year decline of a little bit over 400 students, which is about 10%. Or close to it of the enrollment and how it factors in across the different levels. You can see the majority of it certainly has taken place at the elementary, and over time, certainly that'll work. Those smaller cohorts of students will work their way up through, the middle school and the high school. We see in our projections that we receive from NSDEC on an annual basis, and we've looked at that elementary enrollment K-6 starts to stabilize at about 2017-18. And then starts to tick a little bit back the other way. They're all on assumptions. It's all based on birth rates, so it's certainly important that we come back on an annual basis and really work through that. But during that same time period where the enrollments decline, we've reduced a little over 42 positions. So I think that's also important to know. So again, taking a minute to celebrate our successes and talk about how we align our costs and compare from a cost standpoint with other districts we feel are important. So this is the per pupil expenditure comparison. It's data that we always provide to you on an annual basis. Thought we would represent it in a little bit of a different way for conversational purposes. So the silo on the left is the Connecticut average per pupil cost. The middle is our DIRG, our comparative group. And then you see Simsbury. So we are 12th out of 21 in the DIRG, right about in the middle of per pupil cost, with the point being that if the difference of $335 doesn't look like a lot, but if you multiply that over the enrollment, you can see what an impact it has, certainly on the overall capacity of a budget of about $1.5 million. So certainly a figure that we continue to take a look at as we plan and go throughout. This is a celebration. We've talked about educational reform mandates. There is a new accountability index or a new accountability system that schools are going to be working under starting this year and moving forward into the future. That's going to be very tied into the overall evaluation system that we're going to be employing. And Simsbury High School was ranked as the 5th highest high school in the entire state in this accountability index. We also had 2 other schools, Terrifield School and Henry James Middle School, rated as schools of distinction. So our schools in this new accountability index favor very well, which we're proud of, but the schools that we are categorized with from comparative standpoint and how they align with per pupil cost in terms of return for investment, you can see that those other districts listed on that list have much higher per pupil expenditure than Simsbury does. This last chart, a little bit complicated, but I think it tells a story that we are proud of. If you look at the horizontal axis, that's again the per pupil cost information, and then up the vertical axis is the percentage of students that passed all areas of the CAP exam, which is the sophomore exam. And it's a comparison with the other districts in our DIRG to see how much money they spend per pupil in comparison to performance. So you can see there's 9 or so schools on the left in the lower quadrant that have a lower per pupil expenditure and lower CAP scores. You move over to the right lower quadrant, you have higher per pupil expenditures and lower CAP scores. 2 districts performed a shade higher than us on the CAP score, but have higher per pupil expenditures, but no district performs higher and spends less within our DIRG than Simsbury does. So a point that we wanted to make in terms of return on investment. This is something just from a culminating experience at Simsbury High School that we are proud of. This represents our elective offerings at Simsbury High School and how we supplement that core curriculum experience for students. This is also where dollars have been allocated over the past several budgets to expand into the 8-period day. And enrollment in all these areas has really expanded as we've provided more opportunities for students. And behind each of these clusters are 4 core sequences for kids that really tie into real life experiences, 21st century schools, and align us really well for the Common Core and that transition that we know we're going to be faced with. So something that we're very proud of, something that we would line up with any of the other comprehensive high schools in the area that have high performance and say that we really have a great program that we've received support from as we've passed budgets in recent years. So the last section here are really putting the numbers out and talking about what's driving the cost, and then some additional information on the reform efforts to kind of round out, provide you some background for any questions that you might have. So certainly the upper quadrant are the financial knowns at this point. When we rolled over both our teacher and administrative contractual increases, we looked at pension contributions. We looked at contracts yet to be settled. We're in negotiations with 3 of our bargaining groups now, and put a placeholder in there for planning purposes. In the overall health insurance, those are some of the major kind of fixed drivers that we're looking at that put us at about 2.5, 2.6% increase in that area. The line item where it says instructional coaches, special education positions, and technology and equipment, those are new requests, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a few minutes. But when you roll those forward, we're at about a 3.1% increase over the operating budget last year. In the bottom portion of this page is where we start to look at our enrollment, those reductions of staff relative to where our enrollment stands, and our retirements. We have 9 retirements to date. We look at filling those positions and taking the difference between that outgoing step at the highest level and a mid-level, usually about a step 5 with a master's degree, is how the data is averaged out over time, and the savings that we capture from that is about $225,000. We're looking to reduce 4 sections in our elementary schools, strictly due to enrollment. We will still have classes within our guidelines, and our class sections will be in good shape. And I know that's been something that we certainly are cognizant of, has been important to our public and our community. So I do want to be clear that these reductions keep us where we need to be relative to class size. 1.6%, 1.6 FTE or section reduction in grades 7 and 8 at Henry James Middle School. It's essentially kind of shaving off in each content area to resize the teams there due to decline in enrollment. And then 3 FTE at the high school. The high school is currently staffed for what was close to be an enrollment of about 1,600. Enrollment was a little lower than projected this year, and then with the projected decline next year, we feel we can comfortably capture 3 sections of FTE, and again, remain in a good position with class size. The decrease of 7 literacy interns, that's a partnership we currently have and have had for many years with St. Joseph's College, where we hire interns as part of their professional certification practice, and they've worked with us to teach some of our at-risk readers, currently in grades 4, 5, and 6. As you'll recall, we had a large initiative 2 years ago, the Simsbury Reading Intervention Program, where we did a lot of staff offsets with paraprofessionals and hiring of certified reading teachers in grades kindergarten through 3. It's an initiative we've seen really solid results from, achievement results. We reported to the Board of Ed on that mid-year here and talked through that. And as a priority, we would like to expand that program, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So in the expansion of that program and the hiring of certified staff, we wouldn't require the services of the non-certified literacy interns, and we would use that pool of resources to reallocate. During the planning process, certainly some of the things we continue to monitor and some of the unknowns, the OPEB contribution, the 3 contracts I had already mentioned, final medical insurance premiums, Bert continues to monitor that, the oil pricing and the fixed pricing contract, and of course the ECS and the activity at the state level that we're all very cognizant of. We know that ECS is, by definition, being held harmless, and is actually an increase of 135, 137, but it's moving some things around and some other grants, and has brought other questions into play. But as far as the ECS, as we talk about it, that figure is stable. The revenues and the grants are something we had a conversation about earlier in the year. We came to a meeting and worked conversationally with both Kevin and Peter about how we want to represent the grant funding relative to overall expenditures, and have reworked some of our internal documents that are going to be in the public presentation on what we have called the pink page. But in terms of grants awarded in 12-13, you can see the amount there. We're projecting about $50-some-odd thousand less. It's one grant that we didn't anticipate getting last year. We did get, so we are not as comfortable with the fact that we may or may not get it. So for planning purposes, took that grant out of the equation now. We very well may get it, but we'll have to monitor that. And essentially what we've done in this chart, which is the upper piece of, let me just show the pink page. So this is the reformatted page that we had talked about at our meeting, is that the $68 million for the proposed 13-14 includes expenditures related to grants. So that's kind of our gross up expenditure number, which we net back out and then show the final budget number, which is a 1.89 increase of $64,918,869.
We also have that revenue tab and grants tab in your binder, so we tried to put it in a lot of places.
And that has in it the actual line item detail of the FTE and
What I thought we'd do, Matt, is let you finish this out, and then we'll just open it up to questions.
Sure. So the last section here is really how we plan to thoughtfully respond to the reform efforts. So the key reform efforts being the Common Core state standards, which are ongoing work that is being led by Aaron Murray, and is essentially an overhaul of quite a bit of our curriculum in terms of more rigor, changing the definition of how we need to deliver learning in the classroom. As a result of that, we feel it's extremely important that we poise ourselves and support our teachers in that effort. Coupled with that is the new teacher and administrative evaluation plan, which I've provided some background data on, that significantly increases the load that administrators have on them from an accountability standpoint and evaluation standpoint. So in order to support teachers and thus students appropriately, we're requesting 4 positions across the district. They're teacher contract positions that would be temporary positions, 2 to 3 year positions that would help us support teachers with classroom practice and the coaching model in terms of dialoguing around best practice and instruction, looking at student achievement data, really making significant shifts in instruction across all levels. One comparable when we started to plan this was a look backwards to about 8 years ago, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago, when we implemented at the elementary level an entirely new math curriculum called Investigations. It was a different way to teach math, different way to talk about math, different set of expectations on both the teacher and the student. We put the curriculum in, didn't necessarily put the supports in that we should have at the time, and we had quite a bit of community pushback from both our teachers and our parents about lack of understanding with what we were doing. As a result of that, we took some of our master teachers that were in the classroom. We took 4 master teachers that were in the classroom, pulled them out for a short period of time, had them work with teachers and administrators to drive our professional development, communicate with parents, and really help to move that transition forward successfully. So when I look at a comparability between the Common Core standards and the elementary math program, the Common Core standards certainly, from a magnitude standpoint, is much more significant. So we just want to make sure that we're poised and ready to support our teachers and recognize that it is a significant change. The Simsbury Reading Intervention Program, I talked about that a little bit. We are requesting a part-time position of half of an FTE to start to scale that program up from 3rd grade into 4th and 5th grade. The combination of the decline in enrollment and the fact that we've been very successful in meeting these students' needs means we have less students that we're servicing in this program, that we don't feel we require significant resources to start to grow that program up. So the reality is in that we're reducing $111,000 and requesting a partial FTE. So,
Was there another one that, on the prior slide, another category?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So special education. Special education are some structural changes that aren't large dollar changes, but I think will enable us to be much more responsive to some of the needs and feedback we've received from our community and from parents. One of them is a .5 position that will facilitate planning and placement team meetings. Those are called PPT meetings. They're an annual requirement that special education students have these meetings. We are responsible as a district for PPTs that take place off-site for any students that are outplaced or that are at magnet schools. We still need to facilitate those meetings. Those meetings are currently being facilitated by Helen Donaher, who's our Director of Special Education. Up to 25% of her time is spent off-site at these meetings. As a result of that, we're just not as responsive as we need to be. And Helen, that's not a slight against Helen, it's just a structural issue that's been developed over time that we feel we need to address by hiring kind of a single function person, part-time position to manage that off-site, report to Helen, and allow Helen to be here to assist us in some of these significant reforms, because special ed is certainly a very important part of that. In technology, there's some new dollars requested, about $60,000 in the technology line item. That will allow us to start to kind of field test some more of the one-to-one devices at the primary level, particularly in kindergarten, and provide some more devices one-to-one at the secondary level to get those in the teachers' hands to think about how we can utilize technology from a tablet standpoint a little more effectively before we commit long-term as a district one way or another to our next technology initiative and platform. So overall, the dollars are about $400,000. It's an increase well, there's a new staff allocation of 5.5 FTE. And overall, when you look at how the staffing nets out, initial reductions of close to 12, the additions of 5.5, and then a total reduction of 6.46 FTE. And then this is just a summary slide of the dollars of them. Again, in the 1.89, which includes the full funding call.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, thank you. That was
okay.
Very comprehensive, for sure. What we usually do at this point, I'm going to open it up to the members to ask questions. I know I have a number of questions that I'd like to go through, but I always let the members just go ahead first and go through and start asking questions. So, who wants to open it up?
I just have a question related to the presentation. Early on in the presentation, we talked about a mandate with regard to preschool.
Right.
And I'm just curious to hear a little color, because clearly that anticipates, I assume, a certain number of students, parents, opting to go out of our system for preschool.
Right.
How many are there, and what's the potential size that cohort could grow to as it becomes better known?
We have it's primarily two schools. It's Wintonbury School in Bloomfield, and it's Reggio and Avon.
39 are at Wintonbury, which does not charge currently. And the Reggio has 6. There's 13. Total University of Hartford, I think there might be a few preschools scattered.
I mean, the reality is by and large, our district has not been impacted by magnet schools to the degree of others. But of our 100 and some odd magnet school students, I think over 40 of them are preschool. So it's I think it's the majority of our magnets locally. Our magnet school experience is preschool. So I think it's something that people are starting to better understand. And it's 56?
56 kids.
And take advantage of it.
And so therein lies my question. How big could this possibly grow? How many? If you looked at a kindergarten cohort size and then just scaled it back a year and say that the majority of these kids do go to preschool, which they do in our town, and they're going to local preschools, it could be 225, 250. Thanks.
Yep.
What is the per pupil expenditure? Much lower, obviously, than high school students.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I can't hear your question.
Other per pupil expenditure for the paying for the magnet school
Tuition.
It's in the 4,500 range, depending upon the school. It's not a discounted amount, really, compared with the other 117. A total of 117 magnet and out-of-district students, and they're all in that $3,800, $4,500 range. And even the part-time doesn't really give you much of a discount. Several $100s left.
And this is all voluntary, it's not because of some issues or anything else, it's all voluntary.
That they go there.
Right.
Sure, it's a new market option, essentially. You know, that we've had local preschools for years. We have our own preschool program that we feel good about the program that we provide. Ours is a tuition, program.
And this is out of district, so if it's out of district, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. We don't have a magnet in district, so right.
can
But if
I
there
just
were a magnet in
understand-
district, it would be the same.
Are you saying that if they go in district, they have to pay, but if they have to go out of district, it's paid for? It's paid for.
If they chose to come to our preschool program, yes, they'd have to pay. If they chose to go to one of the local preschool programs, they would pay. If they chose to go to a full-day program at one of these magnets, they do not pay. The local district picks up partial tuition and the state funds the balance of the tuition.
So we pay, the town pays for them to go?
Correct.
Right,
And last year, the state picked that up and then they kicked it back to us.
Correct.
right. Because preschool is not mandated in the state, as you know. Preschool is not mandated. This is something that the governor has been talking
Lydia,
about.
can you speak up? I'm sorry. I
The
can't hear you.
preschool education here, or early child education, is not mandated in the state of Connecticut, as it is in some states. And this is something that the governor has been pushing, as you probably realize, and talking with State Department of Education, with legislators and committee about possibly pushing this through as a uniform early childhood piece of it, but presently it is not. So we in this district, we offer the pre-K early childhood classes here. How many kids do we have? Do you know how many enrolled? There are 50 something, right. So these are our students Simsbury students, when we take our Simsbury students and enroll them here, but they do pay for this as they would pay for private preschool. But if any of our Simsbury families choose to go to the magnet schools, those vary in prices. They're not across the board. So the University of Hartford Magnet School, I think we have about 6 or 8 students that we've had there. So Montessori.
The draw is their full-day program.
Right, I understand that, but it's a unique proposition. If you do preschool in Simsbury, you pay. If you elect to leave Simsbury.
Well, only if it's a magnet. Like if you choose to do a preschool in Bloomfield, that's a private preschool. Simsbury doesn't pay for that. Only if it's a magnet school. I just want to be clear on that distinction.
What do they pay to take advantage of Simsbury's offerings?
Full day preschool is just about 8,600. It's about 8,000 for a full day.
8,000?
And so we're not allowed to offset the magnet school.
It's all in that list of unfunded mandates that's in the back of your green book. That runs about 3 or 4 pages.
I just understand what's happening.
Yeah, there's 114 unfunded mandates.
Right, but and magnet schools, they all vary. I mean, if students choose to go to Enfield to the public safety, that's about 10,000. But if they choose to go to Greater Hartford, that's about 8. So they vary across the board, all the magnet schools. There is not one set fee.
What's our number in the budget that we pay for this?
For what?
About 83,000.
We're paying for somebody in town,
For
preschool,
early
to
child
go to
preschool?
another, to magnet school, we're paying how much?
It's about,
This is out of our choice grant. That's where we have historically paid for magnet schools. So we took our estimated tuition amounts, and this is what we did last year when we showed you the full day kindergarten. So that was sort of our baseline, and then we took the monies that were in excess of that, and that was what we used for kindergarten. So that's been our historical source.
Is your question the total dollar figure we pay out for magnet?
Right.
245,000 is the current number based on 117 students, but we're not paying for the preschool this year. So Matt cited that figure of if we were paying it, it would be approximately 85,000 beyond that.
Interesting. Jeff?
I just had a question on one of the tabs in the book on the school buses, and I know that often they're quarter full or half full because some parents are bringing their kids to school. And I'm just wondering, as the buses are being replaced, if there are opportunities for greater fuel efficiency and whether whether we can opt for smaller buses or whether we're required to, on any given route, ensure that should mom and dad not be in school that day, there's space for everyone.
I mean, we need to have the capacity. It's a great question. It's something we're taking a look at now. I know that Sue is working with Sue Kakamo, our other Sue, who's the head of transportation. We have a new software, a new route mapping software to take a look at if we can find any bus consolidation. The challenge is really two things. I went through this a couple years ago. I did take 2 buses offline. It ended up being disastrous, to tell you the truth, the end result, because students who we didn't think were going to take the bus ended up being on the bus, and we didn't have the capacity, and it becomes a safety issue. But you don't change, obviously.
You can't just hold onto a handrail?
You can't. You know, the geographic area doesn't change, and end result is you don't want kids on a bus for over 35, 40 minutes. So you really have to keep all those facts. But it's something we are currently taking a look at.
Salters is helping us do a bus count on various times of
checking current enrollment and
then what the student will be able to look at that and determine if we could shave off a route or not.
But our current plan is to continue to do 3 buses a year on average.
Yeah, 2 to 3. Yeah,
That's sort of where we're at.
Right.
Peter.
On the bus, when's the last time we did that?
Last formal bid. This is, I think, year 2 of our most recent one. So I think it was about 2 years ago. I'm not sure if it was advertised or more proposals accepted.
Well, we did go out and do it a couple of years ago, and it's what, a 3-year contract? Or?
It is.
Yeah. So, question on some of the numbers. I know last year, sometimes you don't know all your numbers. I guess you'd mentioned the insurance. Numbers of certain insurances not known. So are there numbers that would get a little firmer, let's say a week or 2 from now, or they pretty much?
We do expect in the insurance line item, which includes OPEB and our health insurance, that when we get the final rates for health insurance, we expect those to go down, and that is the only unknown insurance really at this point.
And how about fuel? I mean, I know we have the ability to go gas and oil.
We have some that are dual fuel and some that are only gas. It's been more advantageous to do gas recently, so we've been doing that.
So we have a long-term fuel contract?
We have we've done a cooperative bid with the town of Simsbury for our natural gas. That's new this year. That's a 2-year bid. And then we do a cooperative purchasing with a large group of towns and districts for our diesel, gasoline, and number 2 fuel oil. That gets done every summer, so I have cost estimates of where they think that will end up. The actual bidding doesn't get locked in until summer.
Matt, could you clarify one of the slides you had? I think it was on the electives where you showed that sort of.
Sure.
I was expecting to see Chinese up there.
That's part of the. I mean, that's part of the. We consider that part of the core curriculum in terms of language offerings. We envision these as our elective offerings in addition to the core.
Can I follow up on Chinese? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the Chinese caught my eye because on your schedule of grants, you have not planned to have the Chinese grant again next year. And one of the reasons that we actually asked for some of the additional grant detail was because we were concerned when it funded positions, and that if the grant went away, would the position go away, or does it mean it comes in on the other side? So if you look at the grant list, you're showing a half a person less, which is for the Chinese teacher. Are you eliminating that half a person in the Chinese program, or did it slide in the other side somewhere?
We actually, looking at last year's snapshot, we actually had the same situation where we did not anticipate. There was a 3-year grant. This is a private grant foundation, so it's a little different than our typical. And we did not expect to get it this year. We ended up getting it, so that was a pleasant surprise. We got the half towards the salary, and again, we're just being conservative. We don't expect that it'll be a given next year.
But if that money came in, would you take down your budget request by an amount equal to that?
We wouldn't find out until well into the fiscal year.
They're going to turn it down.
But,
How does that work?
but do you have a way of tracking these grants and which ones, you know, are funding people and the cutoff dates and when they may go away? I mean, is there?
Well, we get grant awards through the state and federal grants, so it's a much more regular process. The Chinese program grant through Hanban is really our only private grant, and it's just a little different animal. We don't always know whether it will be offered the next year. So we get a contract, we get an award for most of these grants that you see here, and we're able to track those.
But I guess my question, on that other exhibit where you showed all the half positions you were adding where, I didn't see a half for Chinese added anywhere. So are you adding that if this grant doesn't come in, or are you eliminating that half a position?
We plan to offer.
We're gonna fund the position through the operating budget.
So let me go back to the increased picture. And by the way, your presentation was excellent. I would love to get a copy. It might even be helpful if we could follow along with it.
You have a copy already.
I don't.
They sent that out about 3 weeks ago.
3 or 4 weeks ago.
Oh,
Plus you can watch it on TV.
okay.
Regularly.
I didn't see it. It would be helpful if we had a paper copy when we're going through it, that's all.
Okay.
To be able to make notes and questions. But one of the things I noted in there is there are some other increases, if you go through your budget book, that weren't itemized on there, and yet your itemized things actually equal the exact percentage of the increase and the decrease. So I was looking at things like
What page
equipment.
do you want, Barb?
Page 37. The account series 700. You're adding in some equipment, and I'm not in any way challenging the equipment that you might need it, but I'm just wondering when you what you choose to put up in the presentation and serve and, you know, kind of raise to the issue that you're telling people about. We're missing the Chinese person, we're missing this $50,000 in equipment. So there's other ads in here that I'm sure are offset by other cuts that must not be up there. But how do you decide which ones you want to flag for everyone to see and which ones are kind of...
I think the ones that we chose to really flag for the presentation purposes are the significant staff additions, because there's been a lot of conversation around as enrollment declines, how does your staff decline, and if you are going to add new staff, what are the compelling reasons why you're adding new staff in a time of declining enrollment. So I was trying for presentation purposes to tie the request to the educational reform. And that's how we started way back in the fall when we started to present to the board and move it forward.
Okay, I think Nick wanted to follow up on that question, and I'll come back over to that.
Barb's referring to page 37 in the 700 series, but on page 49 in the 1200 series, you have $372,000 of additional new equipment. I realize that some of this is a question of whether it's instructional or non-instructional, or whether it's part of the plant and so forth, but I guess I'm just sort of trying to figure out how to put it all together.
Okay.
We have in our, I guess what I would say is in our budget summary, which we have a tab for you that just shows all of our major accounts and gives us the net change. It's a little bit different than the format that's in this one. Just helps you to see it a little differently.
This is something we have.
It is. Your budget summary is
In the middle.
second tab. And then you go back to second page. So if you look in the third page back, you have the as you were mentioning, the instructional equipment and the non-instructional equipment replacement categories. So you see the increases there. And then in the 1200 series, the new equipment, non-instructional new and instructional new, as well as technology. So there's a net increase of those three categories of new equipment of 72,000. These are somewhat unique in it. Unlike most of the other accounts, there's not a sort of a baseline. Each year it starts at zero, and we take the requests that come in from every building and every department, and they actually have gone up and down year over year. So it's not that we look at it and someone asks for a little more than they got last year, but We've not broken that down at the Board of Ed level. I have a detailed list of requests. I had to cut certain requests from that, and that's something we can certainly give you more information on going forward. But that's just not how we've highlighted those requests. They are typically many smaller things, several $1,000s each. There's not really like one big project that I can point to that says, oh, we have this one request that's really causing the whole increase.
Are we still doing additional smart boards and all that?
We still have a few replacements there, but as Matt said, we're looking more at the one-to-one, the laptops, things of that nature tend to be more of the new technology these days.
I mean, that's an account that several years ago, I think you'll remember when we went through that Smart Board initiative and kind of outfitting classrooms with, stock set of technology, that the line item was $600,000 plus, which is now $200,000 and change, and trying to increase a little bit on an annual basis.
Peter?
Just on the headcount, I think the FTEs is what he was referring to there, because whether we pay for it in the grant or through their budget, they show total FTEs.
Right.
Is that correct? So
that
didn't change the FTE on Chinese,
right.
It's just where it's being paid for. So I think that's probably why he did that. Because I asked the same thing, because I was curious about the Chinese thing.
Yeah.
So then it dawned on me what's really good. First of all, on the menu, I thought it was an excellent budget. I spent a lot of time Sunday going through, and it was pretty easy to go through it, or and give answers to your questions. So I really appreciate the effort that you did. One question, I'm not sure if this came here, I got it another time, but it was on the capital improvement program. So I had a couple of questions on, you got Simsbury High School turf field replacement.
Does everybody have that list with them? They do have extras if anybody needs it.
A couple of years out.
And this is just what was submitted to the Board of Selectmen, because ultimately it's their capital schedule.
I mean, you got $750,000 for the turf. Is that the new field, or I call it new field, or the newer field?
That is the artificial turf, and that's the replacement cost estimate.
So it periodically needs to be.
Yes. There's approximately a 10-year lifespan.
Right?
Was installed in 2005.
Yeah. Okay. So that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make sure. And then for this year, you have the boiler replacement, the squadron line.
Yeah.
The whole boiler.
It would be replacement of the original 1968 boiler. They are.
You can't do more yourself.
Just a quick
I'm told that sometimes they can last up to 60 years. So, and we do have some folks taking a second look at this for us at a no-cost basis. But we are looking to upgrade to gas and do the condensing boilers, which is what we just did at Henry James within the last few years. One of the unique things about this location is there are some drainage issues on site that would also be part of the work there.
Wasn't there didn't the boiler room get flooded in the recent heavy rain we had?
It did. It was a pump failure. It was a sump pump failure, but it was a bit of a surprise when the fire department got called and found 15, 16 inches of water. We weren't sure what the cause was at 3:30 that morning. Was that Monday morning?
Sure was.
Last week or this week.
Had a lot of weather, and so we were poorly called.
In fact, our maintenance staff and all the folks that were there really did a great job to make sure that we get back up and running with hot water and have school. So
Good. Peter, do you want to follow up?
No.
Jeff? I'm sorry. Kevin, go ahead.
Well, as to one part of your presentation, I thought the whole presentation, both the printed materials and the PowerPoint were excellent. I really just want to call special attention to my appreciation, and probably Peter's, though I can't speak for him, for how we brought in the revenue, the grant revenue. The only suggestion I might have going forward in that regard is perhaps as part of your ongoing reporting during the budget year once approved, that we track how we're doing on those grants vis-a-vis our projection. so that we tie back to the original budget and see, are we running ahead or are we running behind?
Right.
That would be, I think, useful.
Jeff?
I'd say I found the information really useful. And for example, I really like the budget survey information that you had that reflects how low our increases
Compared to
others around. And I also like the percentages in here in terms of increases and decreases in a lot of areas where certainly appears, office supplies down 26, where it looks like you're dedicating some, focused attention on any areas where you can save money. And I don't know if that's a result of joint purchasing with other towns, what have you. I don't think, you get the detail of every line item, but it shows us, I think this is for taxpayers, that you're looking for opportunities wherever we can. And treating it as if it were your own money. Thank you.
Peter?
One other question on school security. I guess
Yes.
that motion all got passed, so now you're off and running with the money that we gave you a couple of weeks ago, and that's going to happen in the next couple of months.
Right. The bid specifications have been, I guess, finalized one more time, and I'm expecting those from Steve Twitchell within the next few days, and we'll be getting that bid out on the street.
And we have a study going on.
Yes, that starts next 2 weeks or so with site visits and an evaluation of both our policies and procedures and the physical plans. That'll be conducted, and we'll be getting information back there with recommendations to share with our board. The other piece, conversationally, that we've talked about at our board to make people aware of is, that concept of SROs, or school resource officers. We have one now at Simsbury High School. There should be some grant opportunities, we are told, as a result of this tragedy, that would be coming forward, that we will, look to actively pursue with the chief in collaboration. I did ask the chief, as did Mary, I think, for some cost information on what would the cost be for an SRO, should we not be able to attain those grants. An SRO at the middle school level that we could share in collaboration with the elementary schools is something that we've talked about that we would be interested in doing. It's a substantial cost of I think it's $108,000, $109,000 cost, but we're having some of those conversations. That's cost not reflected there. Questions about personnel and what this consultant's view of that as a security measure are, or something we've put into the audit, but we're going to be in the least pursuing those grant opportunities as they come forward.
Barb?
I have a special request and kind of a follow-up question from last year's budgeting process. We funded full-day kindergarten last year through the grant programs without an incremental increase, and I wouldn't expect to see it broken out because it's a component cost of all your line items like all the other grades are. But I would be very interested in learning, if we look at full-day kindergarten now, what is that incremental cost to us to run a full-day kindergarten program this next year? And I know it's built in everywhere here already, so it's not a % increase or anything like that, but it would be very informative to understand what does it really cost to add that, because I don't think we ever really understood that last year.
This meeting's a lot easier than last year. Yeah, that's surprising.
That was much fun. I'm going to change that. I'd like to. Do you have a rough estimate of how much it is costing to run the all-day kindergarten?
Well,
or at least the incremental cost for adding the second part of the day?
For the current year, I mean, it's basically the cost of the $650,000 or so in our grants, and 700.
7 teachers.
Yeah, 7 teachers.
So about $750,000 figured supplies and repairs.
7 at the margin?
It was 7 additional.
Plus 7.
Yeah. Plus 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, what I'd like to do is just go through, I'd ask you to maybe turn to your budget book, this one right here. I'm going to start my questions using this, and I'll go page by page. Just on page 1, it appears to me that the two drivers here are strictly instructional, which is the cost of your contracts, along with insurance and pensions. Those seem to be the two drivers. Instructional looks like it's going up by about $900,000, and insurance pension about $700,000. So, and over the course of 2 years, your total budget's gone up about $2.2 million. Okay, which I think is probably about average from maybe, or less than average for most of the school districts that also have declining enrollments. That's at least my observation. Okay.
Before you leave that
Sure.
page,
Go ahead.
from my point of view, the percentages you're showing here, because of the last item, the last row there, the percentages are meaningless over on the right-hand side. You can't make comparisons.
You can look at it.
It's percent of budget.
I understand that, but the .52 down there at the bottom needs to be filtered into, obviously, line 1 and 2, but...
Oh, you mean
and
reserve
other things.
unnegotiated contracts?
But the point is, when you start trying to compare the percentages going, across the page, or when you try and do it on page 2, the same problem. I mean, then going down the numbers there, just looking at the last number, the 1.7, or over the left-hand side, the 2.89 is going to be a bigger number if you put the 52 basis points in there. Mm-hmm. And so I find looking at these couple of exhibits not very meaningful, because it really isn't, it's apples and oranges.
Not unless you get to the bottom line, the totals.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, that's where I said the $2.2 million over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to move on to...
That's just an opinion of one, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be shared or mandate a change in direction.
Right.
I think it's useful to look at these major categories and their percentage contribution to the total.
Well,
maybe not year over year, but at least in any given budget year, I think the percentages are always instructive.
Well, we could always go back and put the reserve unnegotiated contract numbers in from the previous years in those other two columns to get numbers that, are more comparable. That's all I'm saying.
You're fairly, the unnegotiated, the number that you plug in there is typically around where you are, right? I mean, you don't see large spikes or large savings off of those numbers, correct? I mean, they may vary some, but it's a pretty good rough idea, right? Yeah. Okay. I want to go to page 5 on your enrollment. The high school. Obviously, the high school enrollment is projected at 748. I'm sorry, 1,565. That looks like that we had a little bubble going through there because the year before it was 1,620. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's still higher than before, but I don't know going back. I didn't pull out my budget books going back to like 1999 and stuff like that, but at one point we added a third vice principal.
Correct.
And I don't remember what year we did that. And is that based on enrollment? And with declining enrollment, will we be able to see a reduction back to 2 vice principals?
I think at the time it was based not only on enrollment, but complexities of the job and how things change. And quite honestly, Paul, with the mandates on teacher and administrative evaluation and the magnitude of things that need to be done by administrators, I think there's a breakdown in your supplementary materials of just the sheer, not even meetings, but the number of observations that need to be done, mandated by the state. It's threefold to what we currently practice now. Would be, unless there is an incredible decrease in the amount of teachers that are evaluated, I think that would be a very difficult thing to do effectively.
Okay. All right. I want to move on to page 8. And again, I really think you guys made a lot of progress since where we were last year with this. And the full-time 27 and a half, that is factored in when you give us a number on your total FTE?
Correct.
That's factored, that's not in addition to that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to verify that. Okay. I want to go on to page 12. I want to point out that under insurance and pension, the pension contribution, you say full funding goal. I think what you're meaning there is you do make your complete ARC, the actuarially required contribution, and that it wasn't done before. This is addition from what the Board of Finance asked you to do, dropping from 7 3/4 to 7%.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I just don't want anybody to read this and say full funding goal means that, we haven't been making that contribution over the years. Unlike West Hartford, which didn't make a pension contribution in 7 years. And that's why they're now facing, like $20 million of additional funding, something like that.
Can I ask a quick question? We talked a little bit about the need for additional equipment. Have you looked at all that to make sure that none of it would qualify for CNR?
Yeah, I put those categories and tried to match up what I could fit into CNR logically. And these tend to be singular items of equipment that are small, that are several $1,000s.
Even with your projection, you're back to this good point, Barb, on CNR. Your CNR is dropping down about $12,000 payout, even though the request is going up slightly. That's because we had a big drop off from 1 year. Didn't we have one large?
Right. If you look at the tab for the CNR in the very back,
right.
There's a schedule attached, which is our pay-as-you-go schedule.
Right.
And it is a little bit counterintuitive that we're actually up a little bit this year from $520,000 last year at $50,000, but because of the historical years, there was a $338,000 year in 2010. See that up at the top row?
Yep.
So it's the 5-year average. It's the 5-year average of all.
So I was really just trying to ask, I understand that you're trying to live within the budget and what we told you to have for CNR, but I was trying to understand if it didn't qualify for CNR because of the nature of the equipment, or whether if you had more in CNR, it would be appropriate to go over on that side, especially because it's declining.
The bulk of it is just smaller items that we wouldn't take out of CNR.
I want to move on to some of these questions other members have asked, but on page 19, I do want to compliment you on the fact that in a couple of these items, you ended by saying that you're more accurate reflection of historical expenditure activity. So you're looking at what the historical is, and you're coming up with a closer idea of what it really is. So I think that's something to
Thank you. I want to recognize Kira Sheehan, who's our accountant and budget analyst. We've been working together on this, trying to make it as accurate as we can.
Yeah, that's great. Well, kudos.
But having said that, there are categories here where, to me, it's almost nonsensical. I mean, on page 22 under office supplies, you spent 97 a year ago. You asked for 152 plus this time around. You say you're going to spend almost 153, and yet you're asking for a budget this coming year of 112.
It's because they don't have to buy as much.
Well, I'm assuming you're stockpiling paper clips or something.
Hardly.
But some of them, as you go across them, you sort of, I understand that there's a nice trend line or a progression, but some of them just make no sense to me at all. I mean, go down.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah.
I mean,
I do. I understand what he's trying to say. If we go back to that summary again, which is in your binder, and it looks similar, but it just allows that increase decrease to kind of get flushed out a bit. It is under the instruction series. We have office supplies showing a net decrease of 40,000. Do you see that on the first page of the budget summary?
23,
it's in the binder.
Yeah.
It's also on page 23 below. Is that what you're talking about? Office supplies 112. You're showing.
Yeah, it just doesn't pop out visually, but yes, it is the same.
Current year spending too, you're on target to spend far more than you did in 2012.
So we have can I just finish? Instructional supplies a little farther down. We show an increase of 57,000, and we show a decrease in the office supplies. There's a lot of overlap historically into what got charged where. So to your point, we actually expended less in the category of office supplies, making it more accurate. We spent more in instructional supplies. So in some instances, it's really where does it belong to be charged. So to your point, yeah, it doesn't seem logical in this particular year, but then once we get the more accurate starting point and make sure that we code it to that right place, we're trying to match it up. And you'll see other instances through this budget of where there's something coming off in one line and going to the other. It's a net, usually almost a net wash. Sometimes it's down.
Why is it necessary to have two categories? Why not just have one?
Instructional supplies has a different reporting meaning for the EDO 01. We spent Matt and I spent our morning talking about the importance of that and they chart accounts. So.
And if it didn't, the board finance next year will probably ask you to break it out.
While you're on that page, can you explain what virtual high school instructional opportunities means?
Those are online opportunities for students to take courses.
Khan Academy.
That's free. That's free. That is actually.
I want to go to page 25.
That's right.
I want to go to page 25, school nurses. I noticed there's a decrease of 0.36 FTE, and maybe this falls under the category of, in the mental health area, but I'm a little concerned. We had a discussion around school safety a little while ago around, additional money and things like that. What are we doing in that regard? And maybe it's not in the school nurses, but maybe it's in, psychologists or somewhere. What are we doing? I'm sure you've looked at it, but, can you just enlighten us a little bit in that regard?
With regards to requests for additional staffing?
Either staffing or what are you doing for students? I mean, with Newtown, they've generated a whole lot of concern around mental health and what the schools are doing and things like that. So if you just touch base on that.
From a process standpoint and working with kids that are at risk on the social and emotional side, we have good solid intervention processes in place, with appropriate staff allocations. When I was asked by my board in the budget presentation, in every budget, what's not on, the list at this point in terms of allocation, we talked about, a wish list of an additional staff member that would be at the high school that would be either in the social work or the school psychologist, arena. We haven't requested that FTE. I feel we have good services in place, but we definitely see students with more complex needs and what are more complex times at the secondary level that we need to be cognizant of as we move forward.
Can we monitor the caseload for those people, for our staff, as to how many kids they're seeing? And is that going up? Is that going down? The caseload, what is that?
I think our caseloads right now are, where they need to be in terms of when we work with Helen Donaher from a special services planning standpoint. But they're also not fixed, Paul. These are things that you can't predict what happens with move-ins. You can see, fluctuations in needs of students that come in. We have high-quality special education programs. I think in many cases, parents move to town to take it, because of the reputation of those programs, and they know the needs of those students will be met. We're proud of that. But we're not staffed in such a way that we have a lot of flux to be able to respond to those things, and that does create challenges over time. And I would say over the past 3 to 4 years with, the minimal budget increases that we've had, we have lost a little bit of our adjustment period to be able to maybe respond in time to some of those needs. And it's just the reality of where we are.
Before we leave school nursing, how many special ed children are we servicing in this year's budget who go over the 3 times
Excess costs? So your question would be the number of students?
Are you asking the number of students in
our current, in the school in our current budget?
As far as special ed, that was in one of the,
we don't, we've shared some information about this previously. We don't have a firm count. I mean, most of we have out-of-district special needs that are health-related, that we're paying for those services. We don't have as many severe in-district needs. In fact, one of the reasons for the 0.36 decrease is roughly 20 hours that we used to have to do a special level of service for a health need. We don't have any. So I would have to get back to you with a count of how many we're servicing in district versus out.
I thought I saw that in one of the pages here. Maybe, but anyway, okay. All right, if maybe you could just get us an answer on that question, that would be good.
Our total special ed students are about 12% of our population, about 500.
And that's down slightly from past years, right?
Yeah.
It was like 12.8 or
over 13 at one point.
Okay, I thought I saw it or something. Okay, Peter answered or asked the question regarding the buses.
One other thing.
Sure, Jeff. Go ahead, sorry.
Relative to the special ed and whatever information you put together, I assume you're not going to break it down in a manner, for example, for out-of-district needs being met, that would allow for an identification of a particular student, correct? Because we don't want that information.
Right.
We want to be sure that we comply with FERPA, and so we've got to be very careful how.
Yeah, we wouldn't expect that. Yeah, absolutely not. Right. Okay, on page 31, you touched on the fuel, but on electricity, we're spending $1,037,000 for electricity. Connecticut's an unregulated state for electricity. I don't know if it applies to municipalities or commercial, but semi with respect to electrical. But I could go out to my homeowners and I could, or my home, and I could, pick providers. Do we do that?
We locked in with a multi-district consortium in 2009. We had a contract that ran through December 2012, and it was at 0.09735 was the charge per kilowatt hour.
How much?
0.09735. Then in December of 2012, a contract that was signed in 2011, we signed for 2 years. It goes through December 2014, and that rate went down to 0.0857. Now, yes, you can do better now, but at the time that this was locked in, it was March of 2011. So we didn't do as well in terms of the crapshoot of where things would be going.
Yeah, but it gives you some budget certainty.
Right. It gives you that benefit of not having to worry for a set period of time.
We talked about CNR. We talked about pension plan. Food service, page 43. Sorry, Barb, if you need to go out and check the score.
What's the score?
What is the score? Okay. Food services, that's just for personnel, correct? That doesn't include...
That's just a small portion of the director's salary, roughly 1/10, and that is the only operating budget food services expense. The rest.
Didn't we start breakfast in the schools, making that available based upon need?
We've
Is that
just
the first
started,
year?
well, we've started, it's not based on need, it's open to all. It just started in the last several weeks as a pilot at Terriffill, and we plan to move that to all of our buildings.
Is that a requirement that we do that?
It is not a requirement. We've been serving, we've been serving food, but in a more a la carte way, and this actually meets the USDA guidelines for breakfast, which then makes it eligible for reimbursement from the federal government. So that does benefit those who are free and reduced, as well as it benefits the enterprise fund that even children paying the full amount, we get a partial reimbursement.
I think it's a good idea.
So is the rest of the cost of the food service paid for by the people who use it?
It's a separate fund that is based on the users that are paying for those lunches.
And does it balance out? Do we see that fund ever?
You don't see that fund in our it's only in the CAFR, and we have had a reserve built up over some period of time. We have some years that are positive and some years that are negative, but we still have a positive balance.
That's in the federal one-pager, right? Or the short book, right? Yeah.
It's in the regular CAFR, actually.
It's in the cap.
Right.
I believe Peter's going to pull the right page out.
Is it the cafeteria fund?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's over in Special Ed Olympics Schedule B2, and page 72.
Okay.
772.
I don't want to belabor some of these things here. I just had a few items.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Would I be correct in assuming that if you're renting the buildings for, you've got in the budget $80,000 and you're spending 34 on additional custodial overtime and so forth, that we're showing a nice positive margin there?
I'm sorry, which page were you referring to?
Well, I'm looking at page 47 where you're talking about custodial overtime, like $34,000, but I think on the revenue side, you're showing $80,000 from renting the buildings to various outside groups. Am I doing something wrong in taking 80, subtracting 34, and saying we're positive $46,000 there?
I think there are other costs that get covered. Now that goes right to the town revenue, not to the board.
Yeah, Bob's right. I know we have to turn the lights on and we've got other expenses, but
we actually cover costs out of our community services budget, and there are some costs in our non-public budget as well.
And so the excess goes to the town. And isn't one of your major renters, aren't they not renewing that?
Some of our users for religious education purposes have
I know St. Mary's is pulling it back. Yeah, that's probably why. Okay. I just want to make an observation under budget summary about the other towns. Other towns are coming in with budget requests anywhere from 8.3, 7.24. We're down at the bottom. We're at 1.89. There's only 6 or 7 towns that are below us. I think, Matt, your phone should actually be ringing off the hook from all those above us. You ask them how you do it. And I just wanted, that all of a sudden struck me as I was looking through this on Sunday. Okay, we talked about safety, we talked about the Common Core, we talked about kindergarten. I just want to get to under staffing and enrollment. The second page there, facilities, enrollment, and task force. We talk about removing modulars, and you've got 4 schools, you're going to remove some, or 3 schools, you're going to remove some modulars. The first year savings looks like it's like $5,189. It doesn't seem like we're saving a whole lot. Am I missing something here? But at Tooten, you're going to save $5,000 by removing some modulars, and Latimer, you're going to save $2,900. I would think going through all of that, your savings would be greater.
Well, it's long-term because you have the additional removal cost of demolition.
That's
So
your,
it's
your one-time.
That's your one-time cost to remove 8,000 square feet.
Okay, so you're just
Over
saying
there.
that's just for that 1 year?
That's for that 1 year, and
next
then-
year it'll be 57,000 or?
Correct.
6,000. Okay,
Next
So-
year, it's going to be on that schedule.
Yeah.
there you go.
Are any of them usable?
We have had interest from some local nonprofits. We're going to advertise to see what interest there is, and not go right to the disposal.
I mean, the 3 schools, the annual, I think, figure we had for heating, cooling, and maintaining was about $112,000 that we won't have to spend. It's progression over the 3 years, once you take out the demolition or the removal cost.
This is my final question, and that's under staffing under the New England School Development Council, their projections. I seem to remember a projection that might have been Dr. Chung's projection when we were looking at the high school. And at that time, the projections were going to be well in excess of 5,000 students. Now we're going the other way. What kind of confidence do we have that these are actually right? And a lot of it is depending upon, again, we're making assumptions based on facilities. So you're looking to take out modulars, you're looking to do other things. What degree of confidence do we have in these that we're not 3 years from now looking saying, wait a minute, these guys made a mistake and we're going back this way?
From a 5-year standpoint, I think the confidence is pretty high because you're dealing with real numbers. Outside of that, if other trends such as the economy eventually flip, they can all have a factor. I worry, when we put so much stake in 10 years out and beyond, because that's when you go back and look at the historical studies that Peter Chow did and some of the other people did. Once the assumption flips and the trend goes the other way, you progressively extend away from that progression number. But they've been very accurate on an annual basis, which is, we've used NESDEC for years for staffing purposes in our annual planning. So I have a good degree of confidence.
Okay. My final comment really is and then I'll take a motion maybe to move this on to public hearing, but I want to get discussions from the members. Looking at capital, not so much in 2014, because I know you're looking at maybe making some alternatives to a new boiler. But in the 15, 16 year, there's a lot of requests there. My concern is that our largest or second largest, depending on how you look at it, taxpayer has announced they're going to move. We don't know what's going to happen with that building. I'm very concerned, and I'm going to talk to the Board of Selectmen about this as well. We don't have to act on this tonight because we got another meeting regarding capital. But my concern is that capital is going to, even though we try to stay within the 7%, I'm very hesitant to approve any projects that are either new construction or major renovations. I'm okay with maintenance, but anything new or major renovation, I've got real concerns over the next 2 to 3 years until that settles down. I'm just going to be right up front with that regarding it. Not only do we have the Hartford going up, but we don't know what's coming in. So unknowns always make me concerned. And when we get to this point about the capital, I think we're going to have some major discussions around capital and whether we approve it or whether we go back to what we did prior to having the high school built. We do a two-year moratorium on that. So I'm just throwing that out there so that you're aware of it, so there's no surprises when we get to the discussion around capital. So with that, Mr. Blumenthal.
Did we get any say in any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm only one lowly vote.
No, I'm just going to say that, though, that while the Hartford does present an issue I thought the numbers that the last one I saw were under 600,000 for personal property that they're paying now. And maybe I tend to see things with rose-colored glasses, but
No, not you.
Not me. But I'm truly hoping that whoever does, because they still are obligated to pay the real property taxes, so I'm just hoping
As long as the
that-
building's standing.
As long as the building's standing, correct. But it's a significant asset. I mean, they're not going to take that building down, but I would really hope that whoever does occupy the facility will actually invest in technology and personal property assets that will be a net gain. I mean, that's my hope. So,
Jeff, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm just saying until we know what it is, what we're dealing with right now is a known unknown. You know, there's known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Okay, and what we know right now is that we got a major taxpayer that said they're moving out, and we don't know what's coming in. So to me, that's a known unknown.
No, I know.
And I'm just concerned about
I
it.
just want to be sure we quantify the amount, because I think by the time they roll off the tax from the personal property, to the extent they've actually moved all the personal property out, if that occurs, we're still looking at probably at that point about what, $500,000, which I know is a chunk of change, but it's not. I don't want, the sky's falling.
I'm not saying it's falling. I'm just saying.
Paul, I guess, when we have those conversations, one known is that each of these capital improvement projects do have a security aspect to them that we at least have to kind of talk about and vet through that are associated to each one of these building projects.
Kevin.
I think all of this is largely speculative, and frankly, I think we should probably concentrate on the agenda item tonight, and I'd like to make a motion to move the Board of Education budget as submitted forward for the hearing.
Okay. Discussion.
I have no discussion on that. I just want to make one suggestion on the capital, but I can wait till after we move this motion and feel like we still make a comment after we do that.
Sure. And right now, I want to make the public hearing that's scheduled for April 9th is a budget and operating budget, or excuse me, operating budget and capital public hearing, because we decided, as we did last year, just to have one. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. Okay, there's a motion on the table to move the budget as presented on to public hearing on April 9th. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Can I just have
Barb,
one recommendation
absolutely.
on the capital? I know we talked about this last year, and I think I saw an early version of it, but I think what might help Paul's conversation, can we look at that cash flow version again and talk about, this is when you have to approve the project, but can we look at when we really spend it and need to borrow it, because that might help the conversation.
Mary Ann is updating that, and that was part of the awkwardness of this year's timing, where this was just what was submitted, and that gets, all the financials get, done by the finance. So we couldn't give you something that was a draft, because it really doesn't make sense.
Okay, when we talk about it, we should.
Right, when she gets it finished, I'm sure you'll be seeing it at your meeting on the 27th.
Although we're not obviously approving any capital items here, there's no reason we shouldn't suggest to them that they continue to plan for doing the boiler or whatever needs to be done around that boiler for next year, right? Does anybody have a problem with that?
No, I know Burke's working on consultants as well, to see whether that's really required or not. Okay, next item, the final item is calendar update. We do have a meeting scheduled for March 19th. It's a regular Board of Finance meeting. We don't have to have that meeting. I've kept it there. We then have a meeting on, I believe, the 23rd, which is the Board of 27th, the Board of Selectmen coming in to present their budget. I would propose that we cancel that meeting, and then any items that we need to take up, we just take up on the 27th.
That meeting's at 5:30, is that?
It's at 5:30 prior to the Board of Selectmen meeting. Is everybody okay with that?
I am. I wasn't going to be there anyway.
I didn't think you were. Kevin, I didn't think you were going to be here, Jeff. So, okay. So I'll take a motion to cancel the regular Board of Finance meeting for March 19th.
So moved.
Second. Discussion? You okay with that? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Motion, Jeff?
I'll take a motion to adjourn. Now remember, just Robert's Rules of Order, you can't just make a motion, the chair has to recognize you to make it.
I'm sorry, a motion to
Halftime
adjourn
already.
takes precedence over any other motion.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go you guys.
Twenty-four. 24.